There's nothing that breaks a father's heart quite like watching his child lose hope. When Merrit Rowe saw the light fade from his son Jalen's eyes after that terrible accident, he knew he had a choice: accept what the doctors said or fight for a miracle. Jalen was 20 years old when his spine was shattered at a construction site. The doctors said he'd never walk again. Merrit was just a 62-year-old garage mechanic with no engineering degree and barely enough money to get by. But he made his son a promise. In his small garage, surrounded by old tools and scrap metal, Merrit started building something impossible, a device that could help Jalen walk. Everyone told him he was wasting his time. The doctors, the neighbors, even some family members. But Merrit didn't stop. What he built would shock them all. Could a father's love actually do the impossible? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The row house sat at the end of Maple Street in Millfield, Pennsylvania, a working-class town where everyone knew everyone and nobody had much but made do with what they had. The house itself was modest, a two-bedroom ranch with faded blue siding and a detached garage that had seen better days. But to Merrit Rowe, that garage was sacred ground. It was where he built his life, raised his son, and kept the memory of his late wife alive through the smell of motor oil and the sound of wrenches turning. Merrit had been a mechanic for 40 years. His hands were permanently stained with grease, his knuckles scarred from decades of scraped metal and stubborn bolts. He'd never finished high school, dropped out at 16 when his own father died, and someone needed to pay the bills. But he had a gift for understanding how things worked. Give him an engine that wouldn't start, and he'd find the problem. Show him a machine that had given up, and he'd coax it back to life. He'd met Marie at the local diner when he was 23. She was a waitress with kind eyes and a laugh that made him forget how tired he was. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Jalen was born 2 years after that, and for a while, life felt complete. Marie died when Jalen was 8, an aneurysm that came without warning took her in her sleep. Merrit woke up that morning to find his world had changed forever. Raising Jalen alone had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. But it was also the thing he was most proud of. He taught his son everything he knew: how to change oil, how to fix a carburetor, how to measure twice and cut once. On weekends, they'd work on projects together in the garage. Sometimes it was fixing a neighbor's lawnmower. Other times, they'd build something just for fun: a birdhouse, a small workbench, a wooden bat for Jalen's Little League games. Jalen had been a natural athlete. From the time he could walk, he was running, jumping, throwing. Baseball became his passion. Merrit would spend hours in the backyard with him, teaching him to throw curveballs and catch pop flies. The old leather glove still hung on a nail in the garage, worn and beloved. Jalen had dreams of playing college ball, maybe going pro if he got lucky. But more than that, he wanted to be an engineer. He'd watch his father work and ask endless questions about how things functioned. Why metal bent the way it did? What made an engine run? He was smarter than Merrit had ever been. Graduated high school with honors, got accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship. But the money wasn't enough. Tuition, room, board, it all added up to more than they had. So Jalen deferred for a year, took a job with a local construction company to save up. He was good at it, strong and reliable. The crew chief said he had a future in the trade if engineering didn't work out. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March. Jalen was working on a commercial building site downtown. A load of steel beams was being hoisted to the 3rd floor when one of the cables snapped. Jalen was standing below, didn't see it coming. 300 pounds of steel fell 20 feet and caught him across the lower back. The sound, they told Merrit later, was something nobody would forget. Merrit got the call at the garage. Lionel, his oldest friend and fellow mechanic, drove him to the hospital. The emergency room doctor explained that Jalen's spine had been fractured at the T11-T12 vertebrae. Surgery was immediate. They needed to stabilize the break, prevent further damage. Merrit sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, his hands shaking, unable to do anything but pray to a God he wasn't sure was listening. Jalen survived the surgery, but when he woke up, he couldn't feel his legs. The months that followed were a blur of hospital rooms, physical therapy sessions, and medical bills that piled up faster than Merrit could pay them. Insurance covered some of it, but there were deductibles, co-pays, out-of-pocket expenses that seemed designed to bankrupt ordinary people. Merrit picked up extra shifts at the garage, worked weekends, skipped meals to make the numbers work. Kaisha Washington was Jalen's physical therapist at County Rehab Center. She was in her mid-30s, had a calm presence and honest eyes that didn't promise what she couldn't deliver. She worked with Jalen 3 times a week, teaching him how to navigate life from a wheelchair, how to build upper body strength, how to prevent muscle atrophy in his paralyzed legs. She was kind but realistic. The injury was severe. Recovery was possible, but unlikely. Jalen needed to adapt to a new reality. Jalen tried. For the first few months, he went through the motions. Did his exercises, attended his appointments. But Merrit could see the light fading from his son's eyes. The boy who dreamed of playing baseball and building bridges was disappearing, replaced by someone who stared at the ceiling for hours and barely spoke. Mrs. Dalworth, their elderly neighbor, brought meals twice a week. She'd known Jalen since he was born, watched him grow up throwing baseballs in the backyard. Now she watched him waste away in that wheelchair, and it broke her heart too. She told Merrit to keep fighting, that miracles happened to those who didn't give up. Merrit wanted to believe her. Lionel had been Merritt's friend for 30 years. They'd worked side by side at the garage, fixed cars together, shared beers on Friday nights. Lionel was a practical man, didn't believe in false hope or impossible dreams. But he believed in friendship. He stopped by the house most evenings, sat with Merrit in the garage, listened when Merrit needed to talk. He didn't have answers. Nobody did. But he was there, and that mattered. The garage became Merritt's refuge. After Jalen went to bed each night, Merrit would sit at his workbench surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, trying to make sense of what had happened. He'd fixed thousands of broken things in his life. Engines that wouldn't start, transmissions that had given up, machines that everyone else said were done for. He'd always found a way to make them work again. Why couldn't he fix this? The question haunted him. His son was broken, and Merrit didn't know how to make him whole. The doctors had their answers: accept it, adapt, move on. But every time Merrit looked at that old baseball glove hanging on the wall, he remembered teaching Jalen to catch. He remembered the joy in his son's eyes when he hit his first home run. He remembered the boy who believed anything was possible if he worked hard enough. That boy was still in there somewhere. Merrit could feel it. He just needed to find a way to bring him back. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt impossibly heavy, Merrit would sit at his workbench and think about Marie. What would she do? What would she tell him? He liked to think she'd tell him not to give up, that their son deserved every chance, every possibility, every moment of hope they could give him. So Merrit sat in the garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something he could build that would give his son back his life. The 6-month follow-up appointment fell on a gray October morning. Merrit drove Jalen to County General Hospital in silence, the wheelchair folded in the truck bed, the weight of what they might hear pressing down on both of them. They'd been holding on to hope, fragile, desperate hope, that the doctors would have good news, that the feeling would return. That recovery was still possible. Dr. Pemberton met them in his office on the 4th floor. He was in his mid-40s, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and had the bearing of someone who delivered bad news so many times it no longer kept him awake at night. He was professional, not unkind, but clinical in the way doctors learn to be when emotion would make their job impossible. The X-rays were clipped to a light board on the wall. Pemberton pointed to the images with a pen, explaining what Merrit struggled to understand. The T11, T12 vertebrae, the fracture line, the spinal cord compression. Words like incomplete paralysis and limited neural recovery that sounded like they should mean something hopeful but didn't. There's been some sensory improvement, Pemberton said, looking at Jalen rather than Merrit. You've regained some feeling in your upper thighs. That's encouraging. But the motor function, the ability to move your legs voluntarily, hasn't returned. But it could still come back, right? Jalen asked. His voice was small, younger than his 20 years. It's only been 6 months. Pemberton set down his pen. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from his pocket, giving himself a moment before answering. Jalen, I won't lie to you. After 6 months, the likelihood of significant motor recovery is very low. Most improvement happens in the first 3 months. You've plateaued. The word hung in the air like a sentence. What does that mean? Merrit asked, though he already knew. It means functional walking is not realistic, Pemberton said. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. But I think it's time we focus on adaptation rather than recovery. There are excellent wheelchair models now, vocational retraining programs, resources to help you build a full life. Jalen turned his face to the wall. Merrit saw his son's jaw clench, saw the tears he was trying not to cry. There's nothing else we can do? Merrit pressed. No other treatments? Surgery? We could repeat the spinal decompression, but given the current imaging, I don't believe it would change the outcome. The damage is simply too extensive. Pemberton's voice was gentle but firm. I understand this is difficult, but acceptance is part of healing. Jalen can have a good life. It will just be different than he planned. The drive home was worse than the appointment. Jalen stared out the window, silent. Merrit gripped the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles went white. He wanted to say something comforting, something hopeful, but every word that came to mind felt hollow. Back at the house, Jalen asked to be left alone. Merrit helped him into the wheelchair, watched him roll down the hallway to his bedroom, heard the door close with a quiet click that somehow sounded final. Merrit stood in the living room for a long time, the hospital paperwork in his hands, the discharge summary, the prognosis, the recommendations for adaptive equipment and counseling services, all of it written in crisp medical language that reduced his son's future to a series of checkboxes and resource lists. He walked to the garage because he didn't know where else to go. The space was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Tools on pegboards. An engine block on the workbench waiting for new gaskets. The smell of oil and metal and sawdust. Merrit sat on his work stool and set the medical papers beside him. He stared at them, at all those official stamps and signatures declaring what was and wasn't possible. His eyes drifted to the baseball glove hanging on the nail. He remembered the day he bought it for Jalen's 10th birthday. Remembered teaching him to break it in with oil and a baseball tucked in the pocket. Remembered the sound of the ball hitting leather over and over in the backyard on summer evenings. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Jalen was maybe 8 years old. They were fixing a lawnmower together in this very garage. The engine wouldn't start, and Jalen had been watching his father work, asking 1,000 questions the way kids do. Dad, can we fix anything? Jalen had asked. Merrit had looked at his son, at those bright, curious eyes, and smiled. Son, if you understand how something works, you can make it work again. That's the secret. Nothing's really broken if you know how to put it back together. Jalen had believed him, had carried that philosophy into everything he did. Merrit picked up the medical report again, Read the words, "not realistic," and "too extensive," and "acceptance." He thought about Dr. Pemberton's kind, defeated face, about all the doctors who'd looked at Jalen's x-rays and seen only limitation. But they were looking at it like it was a finished story. Like the body was a machine that either worked or didn't, with no middle ground. What if they were wrong? Merrit stood and walked to the metal shelving unit where he kept his reference materials. Old repair manuals, parts, catalogs, a few books on mechanics and engineering he'd collected over the years. He pulled one down, a worn automotive textbook from the 1970s, and flipped through it. Diagrams of engines, explanations of hydraulics, the principles of leverage and force. If you understand how something works, you can make it work again. The human body was a machine, wasn't it? Not the same as an engine, but still a system of parts that work together. Bones and joints and muscles and nerves. If some of those parts weren't working, maybe there was a way to help them, to support them, to build something that could do what the body couldn't do on its own. The idea was absurd. Merrit knew that even as it formed. He was a mechanic with a 9th grade education. He didn't know anything about medicine or biology or neural systems. He barely understood the x-rays the doctors had shown him, but he understood machines. He understood leverage and weight distribution and mechanical advantage. He understood how to take broken parts and make them functional again. What if he could build something? Some kind of support system. A frame that could help Jalen's legs move even if the nerves couldn't tell them to. Something that could give his son back what the accident had taken. Lionel found him an hour later, surrounded by library books he'd grabbed from his truck. Basic Anatomy. Introduction to Biomechanics. A medical encyclopedia from 1995. Merrit had them spread across the workbench, scribbling notes on graph paper. "What are you doing?" Lionel asked. Merrit looked up at his friend. "I'm not letting my boy give up. And I'm not giving up on him." "Merrit," the doctor said. "I know what they said." "I heard them." Merritt's voice was quiet but steel-hard. "They said it's not realistic." "Well, maybe they're right. Maybe I can't do anything. But I have to try. Because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference." Lionel looked at the books, at the sketches already taking shape on the graph paper. He shook his head slowly, but there was something in his expression, not quite belief, but not quite dismissal either. "You're crazy, you know that?" "Probably," Merrit agreed. "But I've been called worse." After Lionel left, Merrit sat alone in the garage until well past midnight. He drew and erased and drew again. The sketches were crude, barely more than stick figures with lines indicating joints and support points. But they were a start. Somewhere in the house, his son was lying awake in the dark, believing his life was over. Merrit looked at his drawings and made a promise to himself and to Jalen and to Marie's memory. He would find a way, even if it took everything he had, even if everyone thought he was foolish. He would build something that gave his son a chance to stand again. The impossible was just a word, and words could be wrong. 2 weeks after the appointment with Dr. Pemberton, Merritt's obsession had taken over his life. He worked his regular shifts at the garage during the day, came home to check on Jalen, then disappeared into his workshop until 2 or 3 in the morning. The garage had transformed from a mechanic's workspace into something that looked like a mad scientist's laboratory. Anatomy posters covered the walls. Notebooks filled with calculations and sketches littered every surface. The workbench that used to hold carburetors and spark plugs now supported medical textbooks and engineering diagrams. Merrit struggled with concepts that had never been part of his world. Biomechanics, kinetics, neural pathways. The books might as well have been written in a foreign language. But he was stubborn, and he'd always learn by doing. He read the same passages 5, 6, 7 times until they started to make sense. He watched videos on his old laptop, university lectures on robotics, demonstrations of assistive devices, explanations of how muscles and joints work together to create movement. The public library became his second home. 3 times a week, he'd stop there after work, returning one stack of books and checking out another. Mrs. Kowalski, the head librarian, was in her 60s with sharp eyes and a warmer heart than her stern demeanor suggested. She noticed his unusual reading pattern, automotive repair, mixed with advanced engineering texts, mixed with medical journals. Building something special? She asked one afternoon as he checked out a book on hydraulic systems and another on human anatomy. Trying to, Merrit said. Not sure I'm smart enough, but I'm trying. She looked at him for a long moment, then disappeared into the back office. She returned with 3 more books that weren't in the catalog. These were donated by a retired engineer. Too technical for most people, but they might help you. No rush on returning them. Merrit thanked her, and she waved him off. But he saw the kindness in her gesture, and it meant more than she could know. The financial reality of what he was attempting hit him hard. Commercial exoskeletons existed. He'd found them online. Devices that could help paralyzed people walk, but they cost between $70,000 and $100,000. Insurance rarely covered them, classifying them as experimental or not medically necessary. Merrit had maybe $1,500 in savings. His house had equity but was already mortgaged. He couldn't borrow what he didn't have, so he'd build it himself, from scratch, using whatever he could find. The junkyards around Millfield became his shopping grounds. He'd spend Saturday mornings picking through piles of scrap metal, hydraulic cylinders from old car lifts, electric motors from discarded appliances. The yard owners got to know him, started setting aside parts they thought he might need. He paid in cash, small amounts that wouldn't break him, but added up week after week. His workbench filled with salvaged components. A hydraulic cylinder from a dump truck, aluminum tubing from a bicycle frame, servo motors from a printer someone had thrown away, ball bearings, bolts, strips of neoprene padding. To anyone else, it looked like junk. To Merrit, it was possibility. Lionel stopped by most evenings. He'd watch Merrit work, occasionally offering to help with welding or cutting metal. But mostly he was there to make sure his friend wasn't completely losing himself in this impossible project. "You know, this is crazy, right?" Lionel said one night, watching Merrit test a joint mechanism he'd cobbled together. "You've mentioned that before. I'm mentioning it again. The doctors, people who went to school for this, they said it can't be done." Merrit didn't look up from his work. "They said Jalen won't walk again. That's not the same as can't be done. That just means they don't know how to do it." "And you think you do?" "Merrit, you're a mechanic." "I'm a mechanic who fixes broken things." Merrit set down his wrench and looked at his friend. "What else am I supposed to do, Lionel? Watch my son give up. Tell him there's no hope." "I can't do that." "I won't." Lionel sighed. "I know, that's why I'm here. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. You look like hell. You look like hell." It was true. Merrit had lost weight, his face gaunt and shadowed. He slept maybe 4 hours a night. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a proper meal. But none of that mattered compared to what he was trying to accomplish. Meanwhile, Jalen continued his physical therapy sessions with Kaisha 3 times a week. Merrit drove into the rehab center and waited in the lobby while Kaisha put his son through exercises designed to maintain what function remained: stretching, resistance training for his upper body, transfer techniques from wheelchair to bed to chair. Jalen went through the motions, but his heart wasn't in it. Kaisha noticed. She was too good at her job not to. "Talk to me," she said one afternoon as Jalen completed a set of arm exercises. "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on." "That's the problem. You seem angry. Wouldn't you be?" Jalen's voice was sharp. 6 months of this, and I'm not any better. I'm just learning to be a better cripple. Keisha didn't flinch at the word, though she hated hearing him use it. You're learning to adapt. That's not the same as giving up. Feels the same. She set down her clipboard and sat beside him. Your father's been asking a lot of questions lately. About how muscles work. About nerve signals. About biomechanics. You know anything about that? Jalen looked away. He's in the garage every night, working on something. Won't tell me what. Maybe you should ask him. Maybe I don't want to know. But the truth was, Jalen did want to know. The curiosity aided him. What was his father doing out there, night after night? What project was so important that Merrit barely slept, barely ate, barely seemed to exist outside that garage? One evening, unable to take the isolation anymore, Jalen wheeled himself out to the garage. The overhead light was on, casting harsh shadows. His father stood at the workbench, bent over a series of metal pieces that looked like they might be leg braces. The walls were covered with drawings and notes. It looked like the workspace of someone who'd become obsessed. Dad? Merrit turned, startled. His hands were greasy, his shirt stained with oil. He looked guilty, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Jalen, hey, I didn't hear you come out. What is all this? Jalen rolled closer, looking at the sketches on the wall. Drawings of legs, joints, mechanical systems. His name written at the top of several pages. Merrit wiped his hands on a rag. It's nothing. Just a project. A project? Jalen's voice rose. Dad, this looks like you're trying to build some kind of... What is this? What are you doing? The question hung between them. Merrit could lie, could deflect, could send Jalen back to the house. But looking at his son's face, at the mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope, he couldn't do it. I'm trying to build something that can help you walk. Jalen stared at him. What? I know it sounds crazy. I know I don't have the training or the education or probably the brains to pull it off. But I can't just accept what the doctor said. I can't watch you give up on yourself. So I'm trying to build a device, an exoskeleton, they call it, that can support your legs and help them move even if the nerves aren't sending the right signals. Dad, that's... Jalen shook his head. That's impossible. Those things cost a fortune, and they don't even work that well. So I'll build one that does work. From parts I can afford. You can't just build something like that in your garage. Why not? Merritt's voice was calm but firm. Because I didn't go to college? Because I don't have a degree. Jalen, I've spent 40 years figuring out how broken things work and making them run again. Maybe this isn't so different. It is different. Jalen's frustration boiled over. I'm not a car, Dad. You can't just fix me with a wrench and some spare parts. The doctors said. I know what the doctors said. I heard them, and maybe they're right. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe all this is for nothing. But I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. They faced each other in the harsh light of the garage. Father and son. One desperate to save, one desperate not to hope. Finally, Jalen spoke, his voice quieter. I don't want you to waste your time on something impossible. It's not a waste if it's for you. Jalen wheeled himself back toward the house without another word. Merrit watched him go, his heart heavy. He'd wanted to bring hope, but all he'd done was open a wound neither of them knew how to heal. He turned back to his workbench, to the pieces of metal that represented months of learning and effort. Maybe Jalen was right. Maybe this was impossible. But Merrit picked up his tools anyway and kept working. Because giving up had never been something he knew how to do. 3 days passed in tense silence. Jalen avoided the garage. Merrit continued working but felt the weight of his son's doubt pressing down on him. The confrontation had shaken something loose between them, created a distance that hadn't been there before. Merrit wanted to bridge it, but didn't know how. Every time he tried to start a conversation, The words died in his throat. On the fourth night, Merrit fell asleep at his workbench. He'd been up for nearly 20 hours, trying to solve a problem with the knee joint mechanism. The angle was wrong, the range of motion too limited. He'd reworked it 3 times and still couldn't get it right. Exhaustion finally pulled him under, his head resting on his folded arms, surrounded by tools and half-assembled parts. He didn't hear the garage door open, didn't hear the quiet whir of wheelchair wheels on concrete. Jalen had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the garage, to those drawings on the wall, to the desperate hope in his father's eyes. Part of him wanted to believe, wanted to think that maybe, somehow, his father could do the impossible. But the larger part, the part that had listened to doctors and therapists and lived with this broken body for 6 months, knew better. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. And Jalen didn't think he could survive another disappointment. But curiosity won out over caution. He found his father asleep at the workbench, the overhead light casting shadows across his worn face. Merrit looked older than his 62 years. The project had aged him, carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. Jalen felt a stab of guilt. This was killing his father. This obsession, this impossible dream. He was about to leave when his eyes caught one of the drawings pinned to the wall. A detailed sketch of a leg brace with mechanical joints at the hip and knee. The drawing was meticulous, labeled with measurements and notes. But something was off. Jalen wheeled closer, studying the design. The knee joint showed a pivot point that would bear the user's full weight during the stance phase of walking. But the support structure, a single aluminum rod, wasn't thick enough. Basic physics. The force would be too great. The rod would bend or break under load. He picked up a pencil from the workbench and, almost without thinking, pulled down the drawing. On a fresh sheet of paper, he sketched a modification. A reinforced joint using a double rod system with a cross brace. The weight would distribute more evenly. The structure would hold. The pencil moving across paper felt good, familiar. He'd always loved drafting, loved the precision of technical drawing. It had been months since he'd done any engineering work, months since he'd let himself think about the future he planned. But sitting here in his father's garage, surrounded by this crazy project, something dormant inside him stirred. "You're right about the joint." Jalen jumped. His father was awake, watching him with tired eyes. "I didn't mean to wake you," Jalen said. "You didn't. I was barely sleeping anyway." Merrit stood slowly, his back protesting. He moved to look at Jalen's sketch. "Show me what you're thinking." Jalen hesitated, then pointed to the modifications. "This single support won't handle the stress. When you put full body weight on it during walking, the force vector here," he tapped the drawing, "will exceed the material's yield strength. You need double support with triangulated bracing." Merrit studied the sketch, then looked at his own design. "I didn't think about the force distribution. I was just focused on the range of motion. Range of motion doesn't matter if the joint collapses the first time someone leans on it." "You're right." Merrit pulled down his original drawing and set Jalen's beside it. "This is better. Stronger. How did you know?" "Statics and dynamics. Engineering 201. We covered load-bearing structures." Jalen paused. "Dad, even with this fix, you know how complicated this is, right? The mechanical parts are just the beginning. You need sensors to detect movement and tension, control systems to coordinate the motors, power supplies, software to run it all. This isn't something you can just build with junkyard parts. I know it's complicated. It's more than complicated. It's nearly impossible. Nearly isn't the same as completely." Merrit sat on his work stool. "Look, I'm not naive. I know the odds. But I also know I can't just do nothing. Your mother, when she was dying, The doctors told me there was nothing more they could do, that I should accept it and let her go peacefully, and they were right. There wasn't anything more they could do. But I held her hand anyway. I stayed with her anyway, because doing nothing wasn't an option, even when nothing I did could change the outcome. Jalen was quiet for a long moment. This is different, is it? You're still here, Jalen. You're still fighting, even when you think you've given up. I see it in your therapy sessions. The way you push yourself even when you don't believe it matters. You didn't get that from nowhere. You got it from your mother and from me. We're fighters, and fighters don't quit just because the odds are bad. The doctors said functional walking isn't realistic. I heard them, but realistic isn't the same as impossible. It just means difficult. And I've never been afraid of difficult. Merrit gestured at the drawings, the parts, the chaos of his project. Maybe I fail. Probably I fail. But at least I'll know I tried everything. Can you live with trying everything? Because I can't live with wondering if I gave up too soon. Jalen looked at his father's face, at the exhaustion and determination etched there. He thought about the past 6 months. The depression, the isolation, the slow death of hope. Then he looked at the drawings on the wall, at his own sketch with its clean lines and calculated precision. The control system is going to be the biggest problem, Jalen said quietly. Even if you get the mechanical parts right, you need sophisticated software to interpret nerve signals and coordinate motor responses. Merritt's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close. So help me figure it out. Dad, I don't know if you know more than I do. You've got the engineering background. You understand the math, the physics. I can build things and solve mechanical problems. But this, he gestured at the sketches, this needs both of us. Jalen wheeled himself closer to the workbench. He picked up another drawing, studied it with a critical eye. There were problems everywhere he looked. Design flaws. Impractical solutions. His father had done remarkable work for someone with no formal training, but remarkable wasn't the same as functional. This is crazy, Jalen said. Probably. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for promises. And if we fail when we fail, I don't want to hear I told you so. Deal. Jalen pulled a notebook from the shelf and opened it to a blank page. Okay, let's start with the basic requirements. Weight capacity, range of motion, power consumption. Then, we can work backward to figure out what components we actually need. They worked until 4 in the morning. Jalen sketching and calculating while Merrit took notes and asked questions. The dynamic shifted. Instead of a father trying to save his son, they became partners. 2 people with different skills working toward a common goal. Mrs. Dalworth, unable to sleep, saw the garage light burning and smiled. She'd been watching the row house for months, watching that old mechanic disappear into his garage night after night. She'd worried he was losing himself to grief and desperation. But now, seeing the light on with both of them in there working together, she thought maybe something else was happening. Maybe they were finding their way back to each other. When Jalen finally wheeled himself back to the house, he was exhausted. But it was a different kind of exhaustion than he'd felt in months. Not the weariness of defeat, but the fatigue of effort, of purpose, of possibility. He looked back at the garage one more time before going inside. His father was still there, bent over the workbench, implementing the modifications they'd discussed, still fighting, still believing. Maybe belief was contagious. Or maybe, just maybe, his father was right. Maybe impossible just meant nobody had figured it out yet. 4 months into the project, the garage had become a true collaboration space. Father and son worked together most evenings, their different strengths complementing each other in ways neither had expected. Merrit brought practical mechanical knowledge, how to cut metal cleanly, how to weld joints that would hold under stress, how to jury-rig solutions from salvaged parts. Jalen brought theoretical understanding, stress calculations, motion analysis, engineering principles that transformed rough ideas into workable designs. They'd made real progress. The leg braces were taking shape, constructed from lightweight aluminum tubing, reinforced at critical stress points. Hip joints, using modified ball bearings, allowed for smooth rotation. Knee mechanisms incorporated hydraulic dampers, salvaged from motorcycle suspension systems. The frame could support 200 pounds, more than enough for Jalen's weight, and the joints moved smoothly through a natural walking range of motion. But mechanical movement was only half the solution. The real challenge loomed larger every day: control systems. A human walks without thinking about it. The brain sends signals through the spinal cord to muscles in precise, coordinated sequences. Hip flexes, knee bends, ankle rotates, all happening in milliseconds, adjusted constantly for balance and terrain. For Jalen, those signals couldn't reach his legs. The pathway was broken. So any device they built needed to read his intention somehow and execute the movements his body couldn't complete on its own. The problem consumed them. They researched for weeks, trying to understand how commercial exoskeletons handled control. Most used complex sensor arrays that read residual muscle signals, interpreted movement intention through sophisticated algorithms, and coordinated multiple motors in real time. The technology was cutting edge, developed by teams of engineers with advanced degrees and million-dollar budgets. Merrit and Jalen had neither. "We're stuck," Jalen said one night, staring at pages of notes that led nowhere. "We can build the mechanical system, but without proper control software, it's just an ex-puppet." Merrit didn't argue. He'd hit the same wall from a different direction. The programming required was beyond anything he could teach himself from library books. "There has to be someone who can help," Merrit said. "Someone who knows this stuff." Jalen had been thinking the same thing. He'd started searching online, looking for open-source projects, academic research, anything that might point them in the right direction. What he found was a small but dedicated community of DIY medical device builders, engineers, programmers, and makers who believed assistive technology shouldn't cost a fortune. One name kept appearing in forums and discussion threads: Iris Chun, a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon University, working on affordable prosthetics and exoskeleton systems. Her research focused on simplified control algorithms that could run on inexpensive hardware. She'd published several papers and made her code available online for non-commercial use. Jalen sent her an email. He kept it brief, explained his situation, described what his father was building, asked if she had any advice for amateurs attempting something probably beyond their abilities. He didn't expect a response. Graduate students were busy, and they were nobody special. But 3 days later, Iris replied. She was intrigued. Not by their credentials, they didn't have any, but by their approach. A mechanic and his son building an exoskeleton from salvaged parts in a garage? It was exactly the kind of grassroots innovation she believed in. She offered to help, with the caveat that her time was limited. She was finishing her dissertation and couldn't do the work for them. But she could provide guidance, share code, answer questions when she had time. It was more than they'd hoped for. Their first video call was awkward. Iris was in her late 20s, sharp-eyed and direct, with the confidence of someone who knew her field deeply. She asked technical questions that exposed how much they didn't know. But she also listened carefully when Jalen explained their mechanical design and nodded appreciatively at some of Merritt's improvised solutions. "You've actually done impressive work," she said, examining photos they'd sent her. "The joint design is solid, better than some commercial systems I've seen. But you're right about the control problem. That's where most DIY projects fail. Can it be done?" Merrit asked. "Without $1 million budget? It can be done simpler than you think. You don't need to read nerve signals directly. That technology is still experimental anyway. What you need is a good sensor array, pressure sensors on the feet, gyroscopes for balance, accelerometers to detect body position. Feed that data into a microcontroller running the right algorithm, and you can create a system that responds to weight shifts and balance changes. It's not perfect, but it works. She walked them through the basics. Arduino microcontrollers, inexpensive boards popular with hobbyists. Servo motors for the joints instead of expensive hydraulics. Lithium-ion battery packs like those used in power tools. The total cost for electronics might be $800 or $900. Still significant, but not impossible. I can send you my base code, Iris offered. It's designed for a different application, but the principles are the same. You'll need to adapt it for your specific hardware configuration and Jalen's measurements. It's going to take time and testing, but it's doable. After the call, Merrit and Jalen sat in the garage, energized but also daunted. They had a path forward now, but it required money they didn't have. Merritt's savings were depleted. He'd been picking up every extra shift he could, but the costs kept mounting. We need to figure out funding, Jalen said. Maybe there are grants. Disability organizations? Merrit shook his head. I looked into that already. The application processes take months, and most programs don't fund individual projects like this. They support established research or commercial development. What about a fundraiser? Online crowdfunding? The suggestion made Merrit uncomfortable. He'd never liked asking for help. Never wanted to be seen as someone who couldn't handle his own problems. Pride had always been both his strength and his weakness. I don't want charity, he said. It's not charity, Dad. It's people choosing to support something they believe in. We're trying to do something that could help other families too. Not just us. If we document what we're doing, share the designs, maybe others can learn from it. Merrit considered that. The idea of their struggle helping someone else that changed the equation. Made it feel less like begging and more like community. You really think people would contribute? I think people like stories about not giving up, about fighting for what matters. We've got that story. They spent the next evening creating a crowdfunding campaign. Jalen wrote the description, explaining his injury and his father's project in simple, honest terms. Merrit filmed a short video on his phone, nothing fancy. Just the two of them in the garage, talking about what they were building and why. They showed the prototype, explained what they still needed, set a modest goal of $1,200 for the electronic components. Jalen posted it late on a Thursday night. By morning, they had their first donation, $50 from Mrs. Dolworth, then $100 from Lionel. Small amounts from friends and family started trickling in. $20 here, $30 there. People they'd known for years, offering what they could. By the end of the week, they'd raised $300. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof that others believed in what they were trying to do. Then Hugh Brennan called. He was a reporter for a local online news site, had seen a crowdfunding campaign, and thought it would make a good human interest story. Would they be willing to be interviewed? Merritt's first instinct was to say no. He didn't want publicity, didn't want attention. But Jalen pointed out that media coverage could help their fundraising, could bring in the donations they desperately needed. One interview, Merrit agreed. That's it. Hugh came to the house on a Saturday afternoon. He was in his early 40s, wore jeans and a casual jacket, carried a camera and a notebook. He was respectful, not intrusive, asked thoughtful questions, and listened carefully to their answers. He photographed the garage, the prototype, Merrit and Jalen working together. The article went live on Monday. Local father builds medical device for paralyzed son. By Tuesday morning, their crowdfunding page had exploded. Donations poured in from across the state, then from neighboring states, then from people they'd never met in places they'd never been. $50, $20, $100. Messages came with the donations. People sharing their own stories of disability, of family members who fought similar battles, of strangers moved by a father's determination. Within a week, they'd surpassed their goal. Within 2 weeks, they had over $2,000. Merrit sat at his kitchen table, reading through the messages, tears in his eyes. A father in Ohio whose daughter had cerebral palsy. A veteran in Texas with a spinal cord injury. A grandmother in Florida whose grandson used a wheelchair. All of them thanking Merrit and Jalen for giving them hope. "We're not just doing this for us anymore," Jalen said quietly. Merrit nodded. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. They ordered the components they needed. Arduino boards, pressure sensors, gyroscopes, servo motors, battery packs. Everything arrived in boxes over the next 2 weeks. The integration phase began connecting mechanical systems to electronic controls, translating Iris's code to work with their specific setup, calibrating sensors to read correctly. It was frustrating work. Things failed constantly. Sensors gave false readings. Motors overheated. Software crashed. But they kept troubleshooting, kept problem-solving, kept learning. Slowly, piece by piece, the system came together. Late one night, they achieved their first success. Jalen activated a pressure sensor by pressing his hand against it. The Arduino read the signal. The code processed the input. A servo motor engaged, moving one of the leg joints. It was clumsy and slow, but it worked. Father and son looked at each other across the workbench. 7 months of work had led to this moment, a single mechanical joint responding to an electronic signal. Small progress, but real progress. Proof that what they were attempting wasn't completely insane. "We might actually do this," Jalen said. Merrit allowed himself a small smile. "We might." Outside, Mrs. Dalworth watched the garage light burning bright into the night. She said a quiet prayer for those 2 stubborn men, fighting against impossible odds. And she believed, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that somehow they were going to win. 7 months after Merrit first sketched his impossible idea on graph paper, the exosuit was nearly complete. The mechanical frame fit together beautifully, aluminum braces running from hip to ankle, motorized joints at each articulation point, padding at every contact surface. The control system had been integrated, tested, and debugged dozens of times. Power systems were reliable. Sensors were calibrated. The device wasn't pretty. It looked industrial and cobbled together, which it was, but it was functional. They were planning the first fitting for the following week. Merrit had built a simple harness system to secure the device to Jalen's body. They'd borrowed parallel bars from Kaisha's clinic for support during initial tests. Everything was ready. The impossible dream was within reach. Then the letter arrived. It came on a Thursday afternoon in a thick envelope with a law firm's return address. Merrit opened it standing at the mailbox, expecting maybe a medical bill or insurance statement. What he found instead made his blood run cold. The letterhead read Kinetic Medical Systems, Inc. The document was labeled Cease and Desist Notice. Merritt's hand shook as he read. The language was dense legal terminology, but the meaning was clear enough. Kinetic Medical Systems manufactured commercial exoskeletons. They held multiple patents on assistive walking devices. They claimed Merritt's design, the design they'd somehow learned about, infringed on their intellectual property. They demanded immediate cessation of all construction and destruction of all components. Failure to comply would result in legal action. The letter included technical drawings pulled from patent filings, showing mechanisms that did bear some resemblance to what Merrit had built. Hip joint configurations, knee support structures, motor placement designs. At the bottom, in bold type, any continuation of this project may result in civil litigation and significant financial penalties. Merrit walked to the garage in a daze. Jalen was there, working on calibrating the balance sensors. He looked up when his father entered. "What's wrong?" Merrit handed him the letter without speaking. Jalen read it, his expression darkening with each paragraph. When he finished, he read it again, as if hoping the words might change the second time through. How did they even know? Jalen asked. The article. The crowdfunding page. We made ourselves visible. Can they do this? Can they just shut us down? I don't know. It's full of legal language I barely understand. But they've got lawyers and patents and money. We've got none of those things. They sat in silence for a long moment, the nearly completed exosuit standing between them like a monument to wasted effort. What do we do? Jalen asked quietly. I don't know. Merritt's first instinct was to ignore the letter, to keep building in secret, to finish what they'd started and deal with consequences later. But the threat of litigation was real. He could lose his house, his business, everything he'd worked his entire life to build. And for what? A device that might not even work? But giving up meant abandoning Jalen, meant accepting defeat just when victory was closest. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jalen. They sat at the kitchen table, the letter between them, trying to make sense of what it meant and what they should do. Lionel came by the next morning. Merritt showed him the letter. This is garbage, Lionel said after reading it. Scare tactics from a corporation protecting their profits. Maybe, but scare tactics with legal backing. You need to talk to a lawyer. Find out where you actually stand. Lawyers cost money I don't have. Then find one who'll talk to you for free. There's got to be someone who can at least tell you if this thing has teeth or if they're bluffing. Through connections in town, people who knew people, they got a name. Judith Hollingsworth, a retired patent attorney who'd moved to Millfield 5 years ago. She'd spent 30 years working for a firm in Pittsburgh before deciding she'd had enough of corporate law. Now she volunteered with a legal aid clinic and grew tomatoes in her backyard. She agreed to meet with them that afternoon. Judith was in her early 70s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She invited them into her home office, offered coffee they were too nervous to drink, and read through the cease and desist letter with the careful attention of someone who'd seen 1,000 such documents. Well, she said finally, they're not entirely wrong. But they're not entirely right either. What does that mean? Merritt asked. It means patent law is complicated. Yes, Kinetic Medical holds patents on exoskeleton technology, but patents are specific. They protect particular implementations, not general concepts. The question is whether your design infringes on their specific patent claims or whether it's sufficiently different. She pulled out her laptop and spent 20 minutes reviewing patent filings online, comparing them to photos of Merritt's device that Jalen had on his phone. Here's what I see, Judith said. Your hip joint design uses a ball and socket mechanism that's common across multiple patents and predates Kinetic's filing. That's not infringement. Your knee support uses hydraulic dampers positioned differently than their patent specifies. Also probably not infringement. But this servo motor placement here, she pointed to one of the photos. That's very similar to their patent, 8,742,903. That could be a problem. So we can't build it? Jalen's voice was flat. I didn't say that. I said it could be a problem if you were manufacturing and selling these devices commercially. But you're not. You're building a single unit for personal use. That exists in a legal gray area. The patent system is designed to prevent commercial exploitation, not to stop individuals from solving their own problems. So they can't sue us? Merritt asked. Oh, they can absolutely sue you. Anyone can sue anyone for anything. The question is whether they'd win and whether it's worth their effort. A lawsuit would cost them tens of thousands in legal fees. You're not a commercial threat. You're not cutting into their market share. And the publicity of a major corporation crushing a father trying to help his disabled son? That would be a PR nightmare. So what do we do? Judith thought for a moment. First, document everything. Show that your design is original work, not copied from their patents. Second, Modify the components they specifically cite in the letter. Make your design clearly distinct from their claims. Third, let me draft a response. I'll do it pro bono because I believe in what you're doing and because I'm retired and bored. We'll assert your right to build a personal assistive device, clarify that you have no commercial intent, and push back on their intimidation. Over the next week, they redesigned the contested components. The servo motor placement was changed, which actually improved the weight distribution. The control algorithm was modified to operate differently than the patent described. Every change was documented with photos, sketches, and dated notes. Judith sent their response respectful but firm, asserting their rights while acknowledging the patents existed. They outlined the modifications made and clarified this was purely personal use with no commercial intent. Then they waited. 2 weeks passed with no response from Kinetic Medical. Every day, Merrit checked the mail expecting another legal threat, but none came. Judith's theory was they'd been bluffing. They'd probably send these letters to anyone they hear about building anything vaguely similar to their products. Most people don't have the knowledge or resources to fight back, so they just give up. But actual litigation? That costs money and generates bad press. They did the calculation and decided you weren't worth it. The crisis had passed, but it left scars. Merrit realized how fragile their entire project was. How easily it could have been taken away by lawyers and corporate interests. They'd been so focused on the technical challenges that they hadn't considered the legal ones. We're not just fighting physics anymore, Jalen said one night in the garage. We're fighting a system that doesn't want regular people to solve problems like this. A system that says if you can't afford their devices, you don't deserve to walk. Merrit nodded slowly. Then maybe what we're doing is bigger than just you. Maybe it's about proving that ordinary people can still build things. That we don't need permission from corporations to help ourselves. The experience changed something in how they viewed their project. It wasn't just about Jalen walking again. It was about the principle that knowledge and ingenuity shouldn't be locked behind patents and paywalls. That a father should be able to build something for his son without needing approval from corporate lawyers. They returned to work with renewed determination. The modifications made to avoid patent issues actually improved the device. Testing showed better performance, more reliable operation. What had seemed like a setback became an opportunity. The exosuit was ready, modified, documented, and legal enough for their purposes. All that remained was the moment of truth, strapping it to Jalen and finding out if 7 months of work would amount to anything at all. Merrit looked at the device, this cobbled-together miracle made from junkyard parts and desperate hope. They'd overcome every obstacle, technical, financial, and now legal. Nothing stood between them and finding out if it would work. Nothing except the terrifying possibility that it wouldn't. "You ready?" Merrit asked his son. Jalen looked at the exosuit, at the culmination of everything they'd fought for. "Let's find out if we did the impossible." The morning of the first fitting arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth for late October. Merrit had barely slept, running through mental checklists of everything that could go wrong. Mechanical failure, sensor malfunction, control system errors. The list was endless, and each possibility kept him awake, staring at the ceiling. Jalen was already in the kitchen when Merrit came out at 6. His son sat at the table, coffee untouched, staring out the window at the garage where the exosuit waited. "Couldn't sleep either?" Merrit asked. "Not really. Keep thinking about what happens if it doesn't work. Then we learn from it and make adjustments. That's how this goes. And if it's never going to work? If we've spent 8 months on something fundamentally impossible?" Merrit poured himself coffee and sat across from his son. "Then at least we tried. At least we fought. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think we built something real." Jalen wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust in the months of calculations and calibrations and careful assembly. But doubt was a heavy companion, and it had been with him for so long he didn't know how to set it down. Keisha arrived at 9, as they'd planned. She'd brought her professional equipment, blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, emergency supplies. Her presence was both reassuring and sobering. She was there to help, but also to monitor for medical complications, to intervene if something went wrong. "How are you feeling?" she asked Jalen, terrified, honestly. "That's normal. What you're about to attempt, it's significant. But I'll be right here monitoring everything. If anything seems unsafe, we stop immediately." Lionel showed up shortly after with the parallel bars they borrowed from the rehab clinic. He and Merrit spent an hour setting them up in the garage, making sure they were stable and properly positioned. Mrs. Dalworth watched from her porch, hands clasped together as if in prayer. By noon, a small group had gathered, just the people who'd been part of the journey. Hugh Brennan had asked if he could document the attempt, and after some discussion, Merrit agreed. Not for publicity, but for record. If this worked, others might want to know how. If it failed, at least they'd have documentation of what went wrong. The exosuit lay on Merritt's workbench, all its components checked and rechecked. The aluminum frame gleamed dull in the garage light. Motors were secured at hip and knee joints. Sensor pads were attached to the foot plates. Battery pack was charged and tested. Control unit showed green lights across all systems. It looked like something from a science fiction movie. Industrial and makeshift, but also purposeful. Every piece had been chosen carefully, fitted precisely, tested exhaustively. "We should start the fitting process," Keisha said. "It's going to take time to get everything secured properly." Jalen wheeled himself to the center of the garage. Merrit and Lionel carefully lifted the exosuit frame, positioning it around his son's legs. This was the moment they'd designed for, but never actually executed. Theory was about to meet reality. The torso harness went on first padded straps that distributed weight across Jalen's shoulders and chest. They adjusted it carefully, making sure nothing pinched or restricted breathing. Then the leg cuffs, secured around thighs and calves with Velcro straps lined with foam padding. Each connection point had to be tight enough to transfer force, but not so tight it cut off circulation. The process took almost an hour. Every strap checked twice, every connection verified. Keisha monitored the whole time, examining each point of contact, making sure the device wasn't causing pressure sores or restricting blood flow. Finally, the sensor pads were attached adhesive patches on Jalen's legs that would read muscle signals and transmit data to the control unit. The technology wasn't perfect. It couldn't read his intentions the way a healthy nervous system would, but it could detect minute muscle twitches, weight shifts, and combine that with gyroscope data to predict movement intention. The control unit was strapped to Jalen's waist, a black box about the size of a paperback book with a single red emergency shutoff button. One press would cut power to all motors immediately, a safety measure in case anything went dangerously wrong. "How does it feel?" Merrit asked. "Heavy, strange, like I'm wearing armor. Any pain? Numbness? Restricted breathing?" "No, just weird." Keisha checked his vital signs again. Blood pressure is elevated, but that's expected given the stress. Heart rate is good. Oxygen saturation normal. From a medical standpoint, we're okay to proceed. The parallel bars were positioned in front of Jalen. The plan was simple: try to stand, nothing more. Walking would come later, if standing was even possible. They'd learned to set modest goals, to not get ahead of themselves. Merrit powered on the control system. LEDs blinked green as the Arduino booted up. The interface screen showed sensor readings, all nominal. Motor systems initialized with a soft hum that sounded almost alive. "System is active," Merrit said, his voice tight with tension. "All diagnostics green. Motors responsive. Sensors reading." Jalen gripped the parallel bars with both hands. His knuckles were white. Everyone in the garage held their breath. "Whenever you're ready," Kaisha said quietly. No rush. Jalen triggered the first command through the pressure sensors under his hands. The system was designed to read intention through multiple inputs: grip pressure, torso angle, muscle signals, a combination that together said, "I want to stand." Nothing happened. Seconds passed. The motors hummed but didn't engage. Jalen tried again, pressing harder on the bars, leaning forward slightly. Still nothing. Merritt's heart sank. 8 months of work and the system wouldn't even respond to basic input. He moved quickly to check connections, running through diagnostics on the control unit display. "Sensor wire is loose," he said, finding the problem. A connection to one of the leg sensors had come partially detached during the fitting process. He reattached it, tested continuity with a multimeter. "Try again." Jalen took a deep breath and triggered the command once more. This time, the motors engaged. The sound was mechanical, not human servos whirring, joints articulating with precision. The exosuit began to respond, hip joints rotating, knee joints extending. Slowly, incrementally, the frame began to lift. Jalen rose from his wheelchair. 6 inches. 1 foot. 18 inches. His legs, supported by the aluminum frame, straightened beneath him. The motors compensated for balance, making micro-adjustments faster than human reflexes could manage. The control system processed hundreds of sensor inputs per second, translating them into coordinated motor commands. And Jalen stood. For the first time in 8 months, he was vertical. Not sitting, not lying down, standing on his own 2 feet, supported by the device his father had built from salvage parts and impossible hope. Tears streamed down his face before he could stop them. Dad, I'm standing." Merritt's vision blurred. He couldn't speak, could only nod. Behind him, he heard Mrs. Dalworth crying from the driveway, heard Lionel's quiet, "I'll be damned." Kaisha watched the monitors, her professional composure cracking. Vitals are stable. Blood pressure elevated but not dangerous. Heart rate normal. No signs of distress. Jalen stood for 30 seconds. Then fatigue hit hard. Muscles that hadn't borne weight in months screaming their protest. He signaled to lower, and the motors responded, bringing him back down to the wheelchair with the same careful precision. He sat there, breathing hard, his whole body shaking. Not from fear, from joy, from relief. From the impossible fact that he'd just done something doctors said would never happen. "You did it," Lionel said, his voice rough. "You stubborn old fool, you actually did it." But Merritt was looking at his son, seeing the light that had been missing for so long finally burning in his eyes again. This wasn't about proving doctors wrong or building an impressive machine. This was about giving Jalen back a piece of himself. A piece everyone said was gone forever. "How do you feel?" Merritt asked. "Like I just climbed a mountain." Jalen laughed, the sound breaking into a sob. "Can we try again?" They did. 3 more times that afternoon, Jalen stood. Each time a little steadier. Each time lasting a few seconds longer. The system was working. Not perfectly. There were delays in motor response, balance was precarious. The movements were robotic rather than natural. But it was working. As the sun began to set, they helped Jalen out of the exosuit. The process of removal took almost as long as putting it on. Every strap carefully loosened, every connection point examined for signs of pressure damage or irritation. "We need to talk about next steps," Kaisha said. "Standing is incredible, but it's just the beginning. Before we attempt any walking, we need a training protocol. Building stamina, learning weight shifts, practicing balance transfers. This needs to be gradual and carefully monitored." "How long?" Jalen asked. "Weeks, probably. Maybe a month. Your body needs to adapt. Your muscles need to strengthen. The device needs fine-tuning based on how your body responds." It was the right advice, the safe advice. But all Jalen could think about was that he'd stood. After 8 months of being told he never would, he'd stood on his own 2 feet. The rest, the walking, the independence, the future, suddenly felt possible in a way it hadn't that morning. That night, Merrit sat alone in the garage after everyone had left. The exosuit stood on its mounting frame, still and silent now. He thought about Marie, wished she could have seen this, wished she could have witnessed their son standing again. "We did it," he whispered to our memory. "Our boy stood today. Tomorrow they'd begin the real work, the training, the refinements, the long, slow process of turning standing into walking." But tonight, Merrit allowed himself to feel something he'd been afraid to feel for 8 months. Hope. 3 weeks of training followed that first successful standing test. Every day, Jalen spent hours in the exosuit, building stamina and learning to work with the device rather than against it. The first week focused purely on standing, learning to maintain balance, understanding how the control system responded to his inputs, strengthening core muscles that had atrophied during months of wheelchair use. The second week introduced weight shifting, leaning forward, leaning back, transferring weight from one leg to the other. Small movements that healthy people never thought about, but that required careful coordination between human intention and mechanical response. The motors had to compensate in real time, keeping him upright as his center of gravity moved. It was exhausting work, both physically and mentally. By the third week, they were ready to attempt actual steps. Keisha had developed a progressive training protocol based on standard physical therapy practices adapted for the unique challenges of the exosuit. She documented everything: duration of standing, stability measurements, muscle fatigue indicators, device performance metrics. If this worked, her records could help others attempting similar projects. The improvements were measurable. Jalen could stand for 5 minutes now without exhaustion. Balance was steadier. The control system had been fine-tuned based on weeks of data collection. Motor response times were faster. Battery life was extended. The exosuit version 2.0 was significantly better than what they'd first tested. Jalen made a request that surprised everyone. He wanted his first walking attempt to be outside, in the backyard. Specifically, on the old baseball field where his father had taught him to throw curveballs as a kid. "Why there?" Merrit asked, though he understood even before Jalen explained. "Because that's where I was happy, before all this. That's where I want to do this." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The baseball field represented normalcy, childhood, the life Jalen had lived before the accident took it away. Taking his first steps, there would be reclaiming something more than just the ability to walk. It would be reclaiming himself. They planned for Saturday morning, 9 months to the day after the accident. Word had spread through their small community, and people asked if they could attend. Merritt's first instinct was to refuse, to keep this moment private. But Jalen pointed out that the community had supported them with donations, with encouragement, with belief when belief was scarce. They deserved to witness what they'd helped make possible. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures in the low 60s. Perfect weather. The backyard field was modest, maybe 60 feet long, worn grass mixed with dirt patches, an old backstop that had seen better days. But to Merrit and Jalen, it was sacred ground. Lionel arrived early to help set up. They brought the parallel bars outside, positioned them at the edge of the field. Brought folding chairs for Keisha and her monitoring equipment. Set up Hugh's camera on a tripod to record the attempt. By 9:30, maybe 20 people had gathered. Mrs. Dalworth and several other neighbors. Friends from the garage where Merrit worked. A couple of Jalen's old high school teammates who'd kept in touch. Keisha's colleague from the rehab center who wanted to observe the device in action. Iris had driven down from Pittsburgh. She'd wanted to see the culmination of the project she'd helped with from afar. Everyone maintained respectful distance, giving Jalen and Merrit space but close enough to bear witness. The fitting process had become routine now. Merrit and Lionel worked efficiently, securing the torso harness, attaching the leg cuffs, checking every connection point. Kaisha monitored the process, verifying that everything was safe. The whole procedure took 20 minutes instead of the hour it had required that first time. Jalen sat in his wheelchair at the edge of the field, the exosuit secured to his body. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass. He could smell dirt and old leather from his baseball glove that Merrit had brought out a talisman, a reminder of who he'd been and who he was fighting to become again. "System check," Merrit said, powering up the control unit. Green lights across the board. Sensors reading correctly. Motors responding to diagnostic commands. Battery at full charge. Everything was as ready as it would ever be. "How are you feeling?" Kaisha asked, checking Jalen's vital signs one more time. "Nervous, excited, scared. All normal. We're gonna take this slow. 3 steps is the goal. Just 3. Don't push beyond that unless the system is performing perfectly and you feel strong." Jalen nodded. 3 steps. Such a small distance, but it might as well have been 3 miles for how impossible it had seemed 8 months ago. Merrit positioned himself beside the parallel bars, hands ready to catch his son if needed, but not touching. Lionel stood on the other side, equally prepared. They'd practiced this formation during training sessions. "Safety first, always. Whenever you're ready," Merrit said quietly. "No rush. Take your time." Jalen gripped the parallel bars, took a deep breath. Around him, the small crowd fell silent. Even the morning birds seemed to quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. He triggered the standing command. The motors engaged smoothly, lifting him from the wheelchair with practiced precision. He rose steadily, the exosuit compensating for balance, keeping him vertical. Within seconds, he was standing between the parallel bars, weight evenly distributed, stable and strong. The crowd began to applaud, but Merrit raised a hand. "Not yet. Let him focus." Jalen stood for a moment, adjusting to the sensation. Even after 3 weeks of training, it still felt miraculous. Felt like defying gravity and fate, and every doctor who'd said this wasn't possible. He released one hand from the bars. Balance held. Released the other hand. The exosuit made constant tiny adjustments, reading data from gyroscopes and pressure sensors, keeping him upright without support. Standing independently, that alone was victory. But Jalen wasn't satisfied with standing. Not today. He focused on his left leg, on the sensation of weight pressing through the exosuit's frame into the ground. He shifted his torso slightly forward, signaling intention through the sensors that read posture and pressure. The control system interpreted the input. Prepare to step. The left hip motor engaged. The knee motor coordinated. His left leg lifted, not smoothly like natural walking, but mechanically, deliberately. The foot swung forward 6 inches and planted down. 1 step. The crowd gasped. Several people started crying. Mrs. Dalworth covered her mouth with both hands. But Jalen didn't stop, didn't pause to celebrate. He was in the zone now, feeling the rhythm of man and machine working together. He shifted weight to his left leg. The system compensated, keeping him balanced. He focused on his right leg. Right hip engaged, right knee extended. Right foot lifted and swung forward. 2 steps. Merrit walked beside him, not touching but close. His face was wet with tears. He didn't bother to hide. "That's it, son. Keep going. You've got this." 3rd step. Left leg again. The motion was becoming almost natural. The control system was learning his patterns, responding faster. Hip, knee, ankle all moving in coordination. 3 steps. Goal achieved, but Jalen kept walking. 4 steps. 5 steps. 6. Each one more confident than the last. The mechanical gait became smoother. The hesitation disappeared. He was walking, actually walking, crossing the baseball field where his father had taught him to play catch all those years ago. 7 steps. 8. 9. The crowd couldn't contain themselves anymore. Applause erupted. Cheers. Tears flowing freely down faces of people who'd watched this family fight for 9 months against impossible odds. 10 steps. 11. 12. Jalen had crossed 15 feet of field, more than triple what they'd planned. His legs, silent and still for 8 months, were moving, carrying him forward, taking him places doctors said he'd never go again. At 15 steps, fatigue hit hard. His core muscles, still rebuilding strength, reached their limit. He signaled stop. Merrit and Lionel were there immediately, supporting him as the exosuit lowered him to a sitting position on the ground. He sat in the dirt of the baseball field, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face, and smiling so wide it hurt. "Dad," Jalen said, his voice breaking. "Dad, I walked. I really walked." Merrit knelt beside his son, pulling him into an embrace. "You sure did. I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud." Around them, the crowd pressed closer. Congratulations mixed with tears. Lionel clapping Merrit on the back, Mrs. Dalworth hugging anyone within reach, Iris wiping her eyes, already thinking about how this could help others. Hugh capturing it all on camera, knowing this story would reach far beyond their small town. Kaisha performed her medical check, her professional composure barely intact. Vitals are excellent. Blood pressure elevated but nothing concerning. Heart rate coming down. No signs of injury or distress. "Jalen, that was remarkable. Can I try again?" Jalen asked. "Later today? Let's give it a few hours. Let your body rest. But yes, we can try again." They did try again, twice more that afternoon. The second attempt, Jalen walked 12 steps before tiring. The third attempt, 8 steps, but with better form. Each time building confidence, proving this wasn't a fluke. The device worked. His body was adapting. The impossible had become real. As evening fell and the crowd dispersed, just the core group remained. Merrit, Jalen, Lionel, Kaisha. Sitting in lawn chairs in the backyard, the exosuit resting on its stand nearby. The triumph of the day settling into their bones, becoming real in a way the morning's excitement hadn't quite managed. "What happens now?" Jalen asked. "Now you keep practicing," Kaisha said. "Build stamina. Walk farther. Eventually we work toward independence from the parallel bars. And we document everything," Iris added. "Share the designs, the code, the process. Other families need to know this is possible." Lionel raised a can of soda to the most stubborn mechanic I've ever known, and to his son, who inherited that stubbornness. They toasted quietly, watching the sun set over the baseball field. Merrit felt the weight of the past 9 months lifting. The desperate nights in the garage, the financial strain, the doubt and fear and moments when giving up seemed like the only sane option. All of it had led here, to this afternoon when his son walked across a baseball field under his own power. Marie would have loved this, would have cried and laughed and been so impossibly proud of both of them. "We did it, son," Merrit said quietly. Jalen nodded. "We really did." 1 step complete, Jalen's balance held. The exosuit compensated automatically, motors making micro-adjustments to keep him stable. He could feel his heart pounding, could hear the blood rushing in his ears. But beneath the fear and excitement was something else, a growing sense of control, of partnership between his body and the machine his father had built. Tears already streamed down faces in the small crowd, but Jalen barely noticed. His entire focus narrowed to the next movement, the next impossible step. He shifted his weight fully onto his left leg. The pressure sensors registered the change. The gyroscopes detected his center of gravity moving. The control system interpreted these signals. Prepare right leg for swing phase. Second command. Right leg. Step forward. The device responded. Right hip motor engaged with that familiar mechanical hum. Right knee joint articulated smoothly, smoother than the first step, as if the system was learning in real time. Right foot lifted, swung forward in an arc, planted 6 inches ahead of the left. 2 steps. The motion felt more natural this time, less robotic. The delay between intention and execution was shrinking as the control algorithm adapted to his patterns. Third command. Left leg again. Hip flexed. Knee extended. Foot swung and planted. 3 steps. Goal achieved. But something had shifted inside Jalen. The fear that had dominated the first step was gone, replaced by exhilaration. By the intoxicating realization that he could do this. That his father had actually built something that worked. That 8 months of doubt and struggle had led to this moment of truth. He didn't stop. 4th step, right leg. The movement came more naturally now, his body remembering rhythms it thought it had forgotten. The exosuit responded faithfully, translating his intentions into mechanical motion. 5th step, left leg. Merrit walked beside him, hands ready to catch but not touching, his face a mixture of tears and wonder. "That's it, son." Merritt's voice was thick with emotion. "Keep going. You've got this." 6th step. 7th. The mechanical gait was evening out, becoming almost rhythmic. Walk, shift, walk, shift. The motors coordinated seamlessly. The battery pack supplied steady power. Every component they'd salvaged, every line of code Iris had helped them write, every calibration they'd performed, all of it working together in symphony. 8 steps. 9. 10. The crowd couldn't contain themselves anymore. Applause erupted spontaneously. Cheers. Shouts of encouragement. Mrs. Dalworth sobbed openly, her hands clasped in prayer. Lionel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, grinning so wide his face hurt. 11 steps. 12. Jalen had crossed 15 feet of the baseball field, the field where his father had taught him to throw curveballs, where he'd spent countless summer evenings as a kid, dreaming of playing college ball. He was back on that field now, not playing baseball, but doing something even more significant. Reclaiming what had been taken from him. 13, 14, 15. At 18 feet, reality caught up with exhilaration. Jalen's core muscles, still rebuilding after months of atrophy, reached their limit. Fatigue flooded through him, sudden and overwhelming. His grip on the control inputs faltered. He signaled stop. Merrit and Lionel were there instantly, practiced from weeks of training sessions. They supported him as the exosuit's motors reversed their sequence, carefully lowering him to a sitting position. He ended up on the ground in the dirt of the baseball field, the same dirt he'd slid into bases on as a kid, breathing hard, sweating, exhausted, and smiling. Smiling so wide it hurt his face. "Dad," Jalen said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Dad, I walked. I really walked." Merrit knelt beside his son in the dirt, pulling him into an embrace. His shoulders shook with sobs he'd been holding back for 8 months. "You sure did." 15 steps. 15. "I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud." The crowd surrounded them now, maintaining respectful distance, but unable to hold back their joy. Congratulations mixed with tears. Neighbors who'd watched this family struggle, who'd brought casseroles and offered prayers, now witnessing the impossible made real. You captured everything with his camera. The embrace between father and son, the exosuit with its industrial angles catching the morning light, the faces of people crying tears of joy, images that would spread far beyond Millfield, reaching people who needed to see that impossible wasn't forever. Keisha knelt beside them, her professional equipment in hand, but her professional composure shattered. She checked Jalen's pulse, his blood pressure, his oxygen saturation, all normal, better than normal. Vitals are excellent, she managed, her voice unsteady. Blood pressure elevated but nothing concerning. Heart rate coming down already, no signs of injury or distress. She paused, setting down her stethoscope. Jalen, that was remarkable. Truly remarkable. Can I try again? Jalen asked immediately. Later today? Merrit laughed through his tears. Let's give it a few hours. Let your body rest. But yes, we can absolutely try again. They did try again that afternoon, and again that evening. The second attempt, Jalen walked 12 steps before fatigue set in. The third attempt, 8 steps but with noticeably better form, smoother transitions between strides. Each walk proved this wasn't a fluke. Wasn't adrenaline or luck or wishful thinking. The device worked. His body was adapting. The impossible had become repeatable, reliable reality. As the sun set over the baseball field and the crowd finally dispersed, a small group remained. Merrit, Jalen, Lionel, Kaisha, and Iris. They sat in lawn chairs on the worn grass, the exosuit resting on its stand nearby like a tired athlete after a championship game. What happens now? Jalen asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Kaisha answered first. Now you keep practicing. Build stamina. Walk farther. Eventually, we work toward independence from support structures. This is just the beginning. And we document everything, Iris added, her academic mind already organizing the data. Share the designs, the code, the entire process. Other families need to know this is possible. That it doesn't require corporate funding or university resources. Just determination and community. Lionel raised his can of soda in a toast. To the most stubborn mechanic I've ever known. And to his son, who inherited that stubbornness in the best possible way. They toasted quietly as darkness settled over the field. Merrit looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something that had been missing for 8 months. Not just the ability to stand or walk, though those were miracles in themselves, but something deeper. Hope, purpose. The light in his eyes that said he believed in tomorrow again. We did it, son, Merrit said quietly. Jalen nodded, looking at the exosuit that had given him back his life. We really did. The weeks following that Saturday became a blur of media attention, technical refinements, and steady progress. Hugh's article went viral, shared across social media platforms, and picked up by national news outlets. Television stations called requesting interviews. Disability advocacy organizations reached out wanting to feature their story. The crowdfunding page was flooded with new donations, far more than they needed from people inspired by what a father and son had accomplished in a small garage. Merrit was uncomfortable with the attention. He'd never wanted fame or recognition, just wanted to help his son. But Jalen convinced him that sharing their story served a larger purpose. Every interview they gave, every detail they shared, was information that might help another family facing similar odds. They made their designs open source. Every sketch, every calculation, every line of code was uploaded to a shared repository online. The control algorithms Iris had helped develop. The mechanical specifications for joints and supports. The parts lists with sources for salvaged components. Everything was free, available to anyone who wanted to try building their own device. The response was overwhelming. Engineers offered improvements. Programmers debugged code. Fabricators shared better techniques for metalwork. A community formed around the project people who believed assistive technology shouldn't be locked behind patents and profit margins. Within a month, 3 other families had started their own builds, using the Rowe exosuit as a template. But the attention also brought scrutiny. Medical professionals questioned the safety of DIY devices. Some argued that unlicensed equipment could cause injury, that proper medical oversight was essential. Merrit understood their concerns. He'd worried about the same things during every step of development. But he also knew that when commercial devices cost $80,000 and insurance wouldn't pay, families had to choose between giving up and taking calculated risks. Kaisha became their advocate in the medical community. She published a case study documenting Jalen's progress, the safety protocols they'd implemented, the medical monitoring that had accompanied every test. Her paper appeared in a physical therapy journal, lending credibility to the idea that carefully executed DIY projects could be viable alternatives for patients without other options. The exosuit itself continued evolving. Version 3.0 incorporated feedback from the community that had formed online. Lighter materials, more efficient motors, improved battery management. Each iteration made the device more practical for daily use. 2 months after that first walk, Jalen was using the exosuit regularly. Not constantly. He still relied on his wheelchair for most mobility, but for specific activities where standing or walking mattered. He could stand at a workbench to study engineering diagrams, could walk short distances across campus between classes, could stand at social gatherings instead of always looking up at people from chair height. The device wasn't perfect. It was loud. The motors hummed audibly with each step. It was heavy, adding 15 pounds to his body weight. It drew stares in public, made him stand out in ways that sometimes felt uncomfortable. But it gave him choices. And choices, after 8 months of having none, felt like freedom. One evening, Merrit found his son in the garage, sketching modifications to the knee joint design. "What are you working on?" Merrit asked. "Thinking about the next person who builds one of these. How can we make it easier? Cheaper? More reliable?" Merrit smiled. This was who his son had always been, someone who solved problems not just for himself but for others. The accident hadn't broken that spirit. If anything, it had focused it. "You're going to be a good engineer," Merrit said. "I learned from the best. You built something doctors said was impossible, with no training, no degree, just determination and love. That's engineering at its purest." They worked together that evening like they had for 8 months, father and son collaborating across the workbench. But the desperation was gone now, replaced by purpose. They weren't fighting against fate anymore. They were building toward a future. Mrs. Dalworth stopped by with cookies, as she often did. She'd become an unofficial grandmother to Jalen, checking on him regularly, celebrating every milestone. She looked at the two of them working in the garage and shook her head with affection. "You two," she said. "You reminded this whole town what's possible when you don't give up. Half the people on this street were ready to write you off as crazy. Now they talk about you like you're heroes." "We're not heroes," Merrit said. "Just a father who couldn't accept losing his son. That's what makes you heroes. You fought when fighting seemed pointless. You believed when belief made no sense. And you won." After she left, Jalen turned to his father. "She's right, you know. What we did, it's bigger than just me walking again." "How do you mean?" "We proved that ordinary people can still do extraordinary things. That you don't need permission from corporations or approval from institutions. You just need to care enough to try." Merrit thought about that. About the families already building their own devices. About the community forming around open-source assistive technology. About the possibility that what had started as one father's desperate project might become a movement. "Your mother would have loved this," Merrit said quietly. "She always believed in fighting for what mattered. She'd be proud of you, Dad. I know I am." They returned to their work, improving designs that would help people they'd never meet. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening routines. Inside the garage, where an impossible dream had been born, father and son continued building toward a future where impossible was just another challenge waiting to be solved. The light burned late into the night, as it had for 8 months. But now it burned not from desperation, but from hope. And hope, they'd learned, was the most powerful tool of all. 6 months after that Saturday morning on the baseball field, Jalen stood in his college dorm room, strapping on the exosuit before his morning classes. The routine had become second nature. Secure the torso harness, fasten the leg cuffs, activate the control system, check the diagnostics. Green lights across the board. Battery at 90%. Ready for the day. Version 4.0 was remarkable compared to what they'd first built. Lighter by 5 pounds. Quieter motors that hummed rather than whirred. Battery life extended to 6 hours of active use. Response time so fast the delay between intention and movement was barely perceptible. It still looked homemade industrial angles and exposed framework, but it worked better than some commercial devices costing 10 times what they'd spent. Jalen had moved into campus housing a month earlier, taking that crucial step toward independence. His father had been nervous about it, worried about what would happen if the device malfunctioned when no one was around to help. But Jalen needed this. Needed to prove to himself that he could live on his own terms, not as someone perpetually dependent on others. The original graph paper sketches his father had drawn hung framed on the wall beside his desk. Crude drawings that had somehow transformed into the device that gave him mobility. Every time Jalen looked at them, he remembered those desperate early days when success seemed impossible and giving up seemed inevitable. They'd come so far from that place. His engineering classes were going well. Dean's List last semester, on track for the same this term. Professors who knew his story treated him like any other student, which was exactly what he wanted. He was learning advanced mechanics, computer-aided design, materials science, all the formal knowledge his father had taught himself from library books. Jalen planned to take that knowledge and make the next generation of exosuits even better. The second step foundation had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. What started as Merrit, helping a few families, had become a network of volunteers across 3 states. Retired engineers, machinists, physical therapists, programmers, people who believed assistive technology should be accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford it. 5 families had successfully built their own devices using the Rowe design as a template. A young girl with muscular dystrophy who could now stand at her school desk. A construction worker with a spinal injury similar to Jalen's who'd returned to light-duty work. A veteran whose VA benefits hadn't covered the equipment he needed. Each success felt like validation, proof that what they'd accomplished wasn't just luck, but a replicable process. Merrit still worked at the garage during the day, but his evenings were dedicated to Second Step. The organization operated out of his garage and a borrowed workshop space downtown. Small scale, grassroots, effective. They didn't have corporate funding or government grants, just donations from people who believed in the mission and volunteers who gave their time because the work mattered. Kinetic Medical Systems had gone silent after that initial cease and desist letter. The publicity around Merrit and Jalen's story had made further legal action untenable. Interestingly, 2 engineers from the company had quietly reached out through intermediaries, offering technical advice without official company approval. They'd been moved by the story, frustrated by their employer's pricing strategies, and wanted to help however they could. Iris completed her PhD, citing the Rowe project prominently in her dissertation. She joined Second Step as technical director, continuing to provide programming expertise and control system development. The collaboration between grassroots builders and academic researchers was becoming a model for how innovation could happen outside traditional corporate structures. On a warm April evening, Merrit drove to campus to meet Jalen for dinner. He found his son on the quad, playing catch with classmates. Jalen wore the exosuit under loose pants, the device barely visible. He couldn't run that remained beyond current capabilities, but he could stand, position himself, throw, and catch. Good enough to participate. Good enough to be one of the guys. Merrit watched from a distance, not wanting to intrude. But Jalen spotted him and waved him over. "Dad, Show them your curveball. Merrit laughed, joining the group. Someone tossed him a ball. He wound up with exaggerated showmanship, threw a gentle curve that broke at the last second. The students applauded, and for a few minutes, Merrit was just another guy playing catch on a spring evening. Later, father and son sat on a bench overlooking the quad as the sun set. "You doing okay here?" Merrit asked. "Living on your own?" "I'm good, Dad. Really good. Better than I thought possible a year ago. Your mother would be so proud. Not just the walking, but everything. The way you fought. The way you're helping others now. I learned that from both of you. That impossible just means nobody's figured it out yet." They sat quietly, watching students cross the quad. Young people taking for granted the simple act of walking from class to class. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd listened to the doctors?" Jalen asked. "If we just accepted their verdict? Sometimes. But I couldn't do that. Couldn't watch you give up without fighting with everything I had. We helped more than just me, didn't we? We're still helping. Every family that builds their own device because they saw what we did, that's the real victory." As darkness fell, Merrit drove home through familiar streets. Mrs. Dalworth's porch light glowed warmly. The garage light was on. Lionel was probably there, working on another build. Inside the garage, Merrit found his friend welding a joint assembly for a new exosuit. This one for a teenager 2 towns over whose parents had contacted them through the website. The work continued. One family at a time, one device at a time, proving that determination could overcome impossible odds. Merrit picked up his tools and joined his friend. There was always more work to do. Always another family that needed help. Always another person who deserved a chance to stand. People asked him sometimes how he did it. Built something doctors said was impossible. His answer was always the same. "I didn't do it alone. My son's engineering mind, our community's support, and more late nights than I can count. But mostly, I built it because giving up was never an option." When it's your kid, impossible becomes just another problem to solve. And any problem can be solved if you care enough to try. The garage light burned late into the night. In his dorm room, Jalen studied engineering textbooks, already planning improvements to the design. And somewhere, another family heard their story and dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could do the impossible too. That belief, that stubborn, defiant, beautiful belief, was the real miracle. Everything else was just tools, determination, and a father's love that refused to accept the word impossible.